Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Sunday, December 16, 2018, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. If you've been following along with the videos on my channel, I've been reading from this book by C.W. Ceram, which, again, The First American is like a must-read for alternative researchers or anybody interested in sort of a real history. Ceram is a very interesting guy, I have to say. And as I keep saying again and again, when I read chapters from his book, you have to read between the lines with Ceram, because he's trying to tell us something, and, he's sort of in a backhanded way, criticizing mainstream academia, presenting these stories. And even if you go to, like, Wikipedia article on Ceram, I mean, there's no criticisms on the guy at all, which is kind of strange, because you can read just about anybody in Wikipedia and there's like criticisms of, you don't see any in here. But in any case, there's something interesting about Ceram's pseudonym that he uses. I don't know if you guys caught it. I'm a little slow. You guys probably know all about it, but he's trying to give us these breadcrumbs and more or less, have us turn them into whole slices of bread if we're paying attention. And, I'm sure you guys were, but I'm a little slow. But in any case, let me just read to you from the publishers here, Hardcore Brace and Jovanovic, from the time 1971, about, Ceram a little bit. This is the publishers, they're selling this book, so they're selling Ceram too. But, let me just read it to you. C.W. Ceram, whose real name is, pay attention to this, Kurt W. Marek. So his real name is Kurt W. Marek. There's something about that. And I was staring at it the other day, and it suddenly came to me. But, I finally caught it. Was born in Berlin in 1915. For many years, he was a literary critic, newspaper man, a prominent figure in the German publishing world, serving as an editor on the daily newspaper Die Welt in Hamburg, and as editor-in-chief for the book house of Ernst Rowohlt Verlag. The publication of God's Graves and Scholars in 1949 brought him worldwide fame. This distinguished book won both popular and critical praise. It has been translated into 26 languages. In 1954, Kurt Marek moved to the United States and now lives with his wife and son in Woodstock, New York. His other works on archaeology include The Secret of the Hittites, The March of Archaeology, and Hands on the Past, and, The First American in 71. Which is, this book here that I'm taking from the back jacket over there. But there's something interesting about Marek's name. I was staring at it, and, I was like, wow. I was like, this guy's trying to find out if we're paying attention, A lot of writers use pseudonyms, but check this out. I was looking at Ceram's name, and obviously it's some sort of, anagram or palindrome or half palindrome or something like that, because you see, if you switch the K for a C, you come up with, his real name is Kurt Wilhelm Marek, right, with a K. If you swap the C's, right, you get Kurt Wilhelm Marek, C.W. Marek, and if you reverse Marek, it becomes Ceram. So I don't know if you guys were paying attention. You probably were. I'm just a little slow. I didn't catch that until just a few days ago when I was, like I said, I was staring at his name, and I was like, wait a second, there's something interesting about this. So, in any case, I've been reading from Ceram's book, and if you guys new to the channel, you don't know, my latest videos are all covering chapters from this Ceram's book, and you'll see what I have to say about him. But we're going to read from chapter 24, and this one is about the Bering Strait. The chapter is called The Way Across the Bering Strait, by Ceram here. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter, even though it's short, but I want to read to you some interesting stuff from it. And what Ceram says, and like I've been saying all along, you got to read between the lines. And we're going to talk about also the diversity of the native people's languages here and how they relate to the Basque again. I found a contemporary article about it, very learned article about them talking about the Basques again and how it relates to Native Americans. Just we'll go over that in the end, but let me read this stuff quickly to you. Try to get this done quick. Um, Mist fog, drifting ice floes. Nothing more could be seen by the man in the crow's nest of the small ship that was painfully finding its way northward through the strait that would subsequently bear the captain's name, Bering Strait. The date was August 1728. On orders from Tsar Peter, Vitus Bering had set out to explore the northern frontiers of the gigantic Russian Empire. When he passed through the strait, he did not know for certain that he was sailing between the two continents, although both shores would have been plainly visible on a clear day. For at its narrowest spot, the strait is only about 56 miles wide. But he took that on trust. His seaman's instinct told him that these cold waters separated Siberia from Alaska, and he was right. Only that had not always been the case. Today, the Bering Strait is 24 fathoms deep. To whalers, seal hunters, its aspect is harsh as it has been for thousands of years. For the greater part of the year, the temperature of the air does not rise above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, that of the water 48 degrees. The range of the tides is small. The strait would be totally blocked by polar ice were it not for the constant northward current from the Pacific. In the middle of this dreary passage lie two equally dreary tiny islands, the Diomedes. Since the strait is so narrow, Eskimos can cross it in their kayaks, and they do so every so often. But the people who crossed it from Siberia to Alaska more than 10,000 years ago followed the big game animals, and just like the animals, they walked on dry land. William Howes of Harvard sums it up. They did not know that this particular neck of land would be covered as sea rose much later, when the glaciers melted. They did not know they were entering into a whole new world, splendid with game animals, mastodons, mammoths, horses, camels, longhorn bisons, musk oxen, and such oddities as the giant sloth, to say nothing of elk, moose, caribou, and deer. They did not know they were the first Americans. So these people supposedly crossed this Bering Land Strait because the glaciers, were higher and it was dry, whatever it is. There's people who disagree with that, different peoples. I'm going to show you some articles from them later on, but there's people who say that's baloney, and, that the fact that they find these, digs, these archaeological digs in the United States and in North America of these people who were, 20,000 years old, 30,000 years old, leads people to believe that, ancient man was already here. And, there's some migrations came from Asia, but people were already here. And indigenous people believe that, some indigenous people believe that, and some religious people believe there's a different story. And even Ceram, like I said, you got to read between the lines with Ceram. You'll see what he says about some other things. So let me read on to you. And they also did not invade the new continent in great wild hordes. No vast migration of whole peoples ever took place here, as happened very much later several times between Asia and Europe. Quote-unquote, peoples, quote-unquote, who could have emigrated from Siberia to Alaska did not exist. There were just the early Siberian hunters of Mongoloid race who lived in small tribes, always following the tracks of big animals that served as their main food. They trickled into North America, and once again, at the end of our book, we must discuss the question of when, Ceram says, because there's the question of when. And, Ceram's saying that because, they have no conclusive evidence of when. And here's a little diagram Ceram provides of this, supposed migration that took place, which maybe it did, but again, people might have been here, and I think Ceram is even trying to say that, in a nice way, because, he says some very controversial things in here. Several ice ages passed over North America as over Europe and Asia. Half the continents were covered with the mighty sheets of ice, but 4 times the ice advanced and 4 times it receded, each time accompanied by massive climatic changes. Okay, so massive climatic changes, but again, think of the mammoths or mastodons, flash frozen in Siberia and stuff. They were just eating like jungle food a day before or 5 minutes before whatever happened. That ice ages take a long time. So let me read to what Ceram says. The process must not be viewed dramatically. Earthquakes are dramatic, but ice ages unfold at a quote, epic, quote unquote, pace, extending over spans of time that seem beyond the human scale. Yet geologists are fairly certain that the glaciers, by binding vast quantities of water, so lowered the level of the Bering Sea in the Arctic Ocean that the Bering Strait became a land bridge. With all due caution, they further assert that there were occasions when the conditions for Siberian hunters to conquer the American continents were especially favorable from 20,000 to 40,000 years ago, and from 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, right when supposedly that catastrophe happened like 11,900 years ago. So let me read to you what else Ceram says about it, because again, you really have to see, he's really critical of this stuff, and here you can see what his thinking is. It is significant that scholars no longer discuss the question of whether the first Americans came from Siberia. Today, that is regarded as conclusive. The theory has been around for a long time. The first to suggest the possibility of immigration from Asia was probably the monk Jose de Acosta in 1590. But the present certainty rests on a rather indirect type of proof, Ceram says. Indirect type of proof. The fact that all other theories have been eliminated as either wrong or, for example, the theories of the quote-unquote 10 lost tribes of Israel, of Atlantis and Mu, as simply nonsensical. Of course, the immigration probably took place in several waves. That is the prevailing view today. We also cannot entirely exclude the possibility that there may have been chance immigrations by ship or raft across the Pacific or the northern Atlantic before Columbus, and possibly even before the Vikings. Such visits would account, some say, this is interesting, very interesting, and what I'm talking about in this video mainly, such visits would account, some say, for the multiplicity of Indian languages and for racial differences. Very interesting. Nevertheless, it is conceivable that a few tribes in a relatively few thousand years increased to millions and scattered themselves from the Bering Strait to the southern tip of South America, ? For many years, that question went unanswered. There is really something mysterious about the urge to reach the South, which must have inspired these people. For a long time, the simplest explanation seemed to serve a, quote, natural impulse to follow the sun, unquote, a kind of prehistoric southward hoe, quote unquote, as it were. But if that were the case, why did the Asiatic tribes wander northward into the cold and darkness? And why did the Eskimos, the latest prehistoric immigrants to America, not obey this impulse? Instead, they acclimatized themselves to the harshest of conditions barely endurable for human beings. So, Ceram is asking this question, and it's a legitimate question. Why? So, there's a why there. That's, a significant question to ask. Okay, let me just read the end of it here. and what Ceram says, which, it's just very, very interesting. And as I said, he's got some sort of backhanded criticisms here, besides telling the stories that, nobody's going to hear, ignored stories and little told stories or whatnot, because, that's what he's all about. Remember, he was in the Ministry of Propaganda, so he knows when, they're trying to keep stuff, when they're trying to add stuff. He knows all that stuff because, he did that stuff. So, but his interest is archaeology. He's trying to keep it clean. See? So, let me read it to you. The end of the chapter, we're going to look at something else. The diffusion theory can in no way affect this fact. And what he's talking about is the hunters, the earliest hunters, the prehistoric ones, the ones that are, 20,000 years old, 30,000 years old, we're talking way back in time. And even if there was a golden age, apparently at this time, you have some very wild peoples running around in North America here, and, not that advanced civilization. Maybe the advanced civilization that we all see remnants of is even older than that, 50,000 years old, 100,000 years old, who knows? But we don't. So, but, trying to get to the bottom of it. But let me read this to you and what Ceram says here at the end of the chapter. So, as I said, the diffusion theory can in no way affect this fact. And diffusion theory is what the diffusionists hold that several cultural invasions must have taken place, perhaps from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, or even China. As evidence, they point to linguistic similarities, the building of pyramids, certain mythological notions, and other parallels. As far as the resemblance of Indian languages to those of the Old World goes, and I put a star next to this, Willie flatly stated as recent as 1966, quote, "At present, no such relationships have ever been satisfactorily demonstrated," unquote. So there's something interesting to that, although we talked about in one of my videos, how a noted philologist, Canadian philologist, in my video on interesting facts, which covered Verrazano, and then about this philologist, very eminent philologist from Canada, that said how the Iroquois language had a very similar complexity to that of the Basque language. And I just found that very interesting about the Basques and, what they have to do to keep on getting mentioned again and again, having to do with, like, native peoples. But we're going to talk about that a little bit. Let me just read the end of this to you. So, nevertheless, both he and many other modern archaeologists are prepared to believe that there might have been cultural influences from the Old World, especially in Central and South America. So he's saying, they're ready to say about Central and South America, but, this is what I'm saying about Ceram, is a criticism, really. Central and South America, but not North America. But if these occurred, they occurred in historical times. So, referring to Phoenicians or whatever, Egypt, Mesopotamia, that happened during historical times, our phony historical times that they mention or whatever. Millennia after the first early hunters roamed the lonely plateaus of the North American Southwest, tracking down the now extinct animals. And these early hunters, the real first Americans, came across the Bering land bridge, plucky, curious, to a certain extent inventive. Why they did not develop such advanced civilizations in North America as those of the Mayas, Aztecs, and Incas in Central and South America will probably remain a riddle forever. But again, Ceram didn't live to see all the newest alternative research, Göbekli Tepe. I think his mind would have been open to all of these possibilities because that's what his book is really about. And again, they mention in the chapter, Ceram mentions in the chapter about Native American languages and, how accounting for the diversity of them. Well, let me just show you this. And by the way, here's some pictures of, crossing the Bering Land Bridge. And here's some people, some religious people who say it's a bunch of baloney and it's all about how, this Lehi came here, one of the tribes of Israel, so, they discount it. They don't believe that. I'm just saying. And here's an interesting picture, a stone cairn. It's very interesting. Human-made stone landmarks or cairns mark routes as well as areas where hunters sought caribou, providing rough dates for when humans, shoot, when humans moved out of Beringia to higher ground in Alaska. So just the cool picture of a stone cairn there in Alaska built by ancient people, but not here in the Northeast. It's all what do you mean? It's not settlers and colonists? Nope, I guess not. So in any case, let me read here. And by the way, Robert Sepher has a very interesting video on the Basque people. Listen to what he has to say for a second here. If I can
Nestled in the mountains between France and Spain, there's a semi-isolated population of native European people that have long puzzled anthropologists, linguists, and historians because although they are Caucasoid, they do not fit in with the rest of the European population. Their language, for example, is distinctly unique in Europe and not related to any other Indo-European language. But that's not the only thing that's unique about the Basque. The Basque turned out to also be unique in terms of blood. Prior to the advent of genetic research tools, investigators used the ABO blood groups to study the relationships between human populations as well as their migration patterns. Each person's blood is one of four major types: A, B, AB, or O. Blood types are determined by the types of antigens on the blood cells. Antigens are proteins on the surface of blood cells that can cause a response from the immune system. The Rh factor is a type of protein on the surface of red blood cells. Most people are Rh positive. Those who do not have the Rh factor are Rh negative, which compromises about 15% of the world's population, but appears in much higher percentage among the Basque.
So anyway, I just wanted to show you a little bit of Robert Sepher's video there. I'll put a link in the description to it. It's very interesting about the Basque people. And I just wanted to talk about this article a little bit in this ayahuasca.com because she mentions the Basque, a very learned article by this native person, this Gail High Pine. It's a very learned article here. I'll put a link to this in the description too. But she talks about the Basque here and how it's an isolate language and about how a lot of the European languages that were isolates, thousands of years ago were, sort of absorbed by conquering peoples, et cetera, and how interesting it is that among the Native American people, that this didn't happen and they had all these different isolate languages. So it's very interesting, and she mentions the Basque in this article here. That she did for Ayahuasca magazine here. So it says here, all the languages in Europe are Indo-European except for Hungarian, Finnish, and Sami, Lap, which are members of the Ural-Altaic family and distantly related to Turkish and some Siberian languages. And Basque, which is an isolate, completely unique in the world, both in structure and in vocabulary. An isolate is a language with no known relatives. So she goes on to say about how many of these native, people's languages are all isolates and how unusual that is. So just something to think about, that's relative, that, the Basque keep coming up, the language of the native, the diversity of the Native Americans keeps on coming up. Um, their morphology keeps on coming up. All of these things, but we're talking actually in mainstream too. So you know, I saw some recent videos where they're using sort of mainstream stuff to explain some certain things about the history of North America, but we have to be extremely skeptical of all of that, And this lady here, she believes here. I'll post the link to this article in this description. She's one of these Native Americans who thinks, look, the fact that they find all these old, remains that are 20 and 30,000 years ago, maybe older or whatever. She doesn't really believe that Native Americans migrated across the land bridge. In her article here, she says, they use that argument, well, you're immigrants too, et cetera, et cetera. So she doesn't like that. And she believes, maybe like Ceram does, I think that's what he was trying to say. In his chapter there about the Bering Land Strait, that the human beings go back even further than that in North America, and we're being led to believe something else, and since we're being led to believe something else, pursuing another way, like what Frank C. Hibben was talking about, the archaeologist, anthropologist from the University of New Mexico, who was, much maligned, similar to that. So, in any case, guys, I just wanted to bring this to you again from Ceram's book, and again, he's trying to see if we're awake, if we're reading between the lines, if we're trying to take those breadcrumbs he's given us, and making slices of bread out of them. Okay, guys. Anyway, thanks a lot, and until the next time, peace.